Two office pranksters thought they'd found the perfect victim, a quiet, struggling black single father. They paired him on a blind date with a woman they believed no one would ever choose and waited with their phones ready to record the humiliation. But instead of rejection, mockery, or an awkward escape, something unexpected happened. Point one man chose kindness over cruelty. Point one woman chose hope over humiliation. And a cruel joke turned into a love story no one, not even them, could have imagined. Stay with this story, because what happened next will leave you in tears. Kieran hesitated outside the Velvet Finch Café, his fingers tightening around the small paper cup he'd forgotten to throw away. The evening air felt heavier than usual, as though it already knew he didn't belong in whatever waited for him inside. He wasn't a man who believed in blind dates, much less surprise setups arranged by coworkers who laughed too loudly and cared too little. But his sister's voice echoed in his mind. Just try, Kieran. You deserve something good. Inside, hidden near the back wall, a group of familiar faces leaned over a phone, pretending not to stare. Their eyes glittered with anticipation. Then the bell above the door chimed again. Isla stepped in. She paused for half a heartbeat, sensing it immediately. The tension, the hush, the cruel curiosity hanging in the air. Her gaze flickered to the corner. She knew that look. She had worn it herself too many times, like a scar that never quite faded. This wasn't a date. It was a setup, a spectacle. Her shoulders lowered as if preparing for impact. Kieran watched her approach and felt something warm and unexpected loosen inside his chest. It wasn't pity. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. I almost left, she said quietly when she reached the table. But I figured it's better to see the joke to the end. He stood, not awkwardly, with intention, pulling the chair out for her like it mattered. Because it did. I need to tell you something first, he said, loud enough for the room to hear, but only looking at her. I didn't agree to this for a laugh, and I didn't expect this to be filmed. Her eyes lifted, confused. Then his voice softened, honest as an open wound. I came because I saw your photo, and I thought you had kind eyes. The whisper of the cafe froze into silence. The phones in the corner dipped, breath caught in a dozen throats. In that single sentence, the joke shattered. And in its place, something human and sacred was born. Isla sat down, not as a punchline, but as someone chosen. The quiet returned to the cafe as the waitress set 2 cups of coffee on the small round table, along with a plate of warm scones that sent out a gentle, comforting aroma. The world, just moments earlier filled with whispers and hidden cameras, slowly faded back into its ordinary rhythm. But for Kieran and Isla, nothing felt ordinary anymore. They sat across from each other in a kind of fragile peace. Isla wrapped both hands around her mug, staring into the swirling cream as if it might reveal something kinder about herself. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the residue of years spent bracing for rejection. I almost didn't come, she said, finally lifting her gaze. I've been invited to things like this before. Not real invitations, more like dares, experiments, jokes. Kieran felt something twist in his chest. People have always been fascinated with numbers, she continued softly. My weight, my measurements, my size. Like I'm a statistic instead of a human being. A sad smile touched her lips. Doctors, astrologers, strangers on the internet. Apparently everyone knows what I should be, except me. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. But you still came, he said. Why? She exhaled. Because part of me, the foolish, stubborn part, keeps hoping that one day someone will see me before they see my body. The words lingered between them. Kieran looked at her carefully then, as though trying to memorize the exact shade of honesty in her eyes. I wasn't always like this either, he admitted. His hand moved to the edge of his cup. He didn't lift it. I used to be engaged, he said, to the girl I thought I'd spend my life with. When she found out she was pregnant, she panicked and left. She said she wasn't ready to be a mother, or a wife, or anything like that life. Isla's expression softened, empathy replacing the sadness. How old is she? Isla asked. 6 now. Pippa. His lips curved faintly. She has curly hair that never stays in place and a laugh that could fill an empty room. He paused, as if the memory itself was a kind of prayer. For the first year, I was just surviving. Learning how to braid hair, I barely understood. How to pack lunches shaped like animals. How to wake up in a night when she had nightmares and tell her mom was just away for a bit. His jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed gentle. At some point, that lie started hurting more than the truth. What did you tell her then? Isla whispered that her mommy was lost, and that sometimes people can love you and still not stay. He swallowed, but that I would stay, always. Silence wrapped around them, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of understanding. For years, he continued. That's how long it's been since I even thought about dating. Not because I didn't want companionship, but because I didn't believe I was allowed to want it. Islan nodded slowly. I never thought I'd be allowed to experience it, she said. To be pursued, to be chosen, to be enough. The word enough trembled when she said it. Kieran reached across the table without thinking and placed his hand over hers. The touch was gentle, respectful, warm. He gave her time to move away if she wanted to. She didn't. You are enough, Isla, he said quietly. Not because you fit into whatever world someone imagined, but because you're kind, because you still believe in people after they've given you every reason not to. That takes a kind of strength most don't have. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't hide them. Nobody has ever said that to me before, she confessed. Then they weren't worth your time, he replied. They sat there for what felt like minutes, but could have been hours. Talking, laughing, real, soft laughter touched with pain and healing. They spoke about childhood memories, favorite songs, dreams that had slowly dimmed but never died. She told him she once dreamed of opening a bookstore with a small tea corner. He confessed he loved painting, even though he hadn't picked up a brush in years. Outside, the sky turned a deeper shade of blue, stretching toward night. And still neither of them wanted to stand up in that little corner of the Velvet Finch Café. Two strangers who had been meant to destroy each other's dignity had instead become a temporary sanctuary for one another. Not a joke, not a prank, just two broken hearts, slowly remembering how to beat again, and for the first time in a very long while. Both of them felt something unfamiliar, something brave. They felt chosen. The sun had barely begun to set when Kieran's car pulled to a gentle stop outside a small house, its porch light glowing like a quiet promise. Isla stared at the front door for a second longer than necessary, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. Are you okay? He asked, his voice soft, careful. I'm nervous, she admitted. Not the bad kind, just the kind you feel before something important. He smiled. That means you care. The front door opened before he could even reach for the handle. Daddy. Pippa's tiny body launched itself forward, arms wide, curls bouncing like a halo around her head. Kieran lifted her into the air, spinning her once before setting her down. There's someone I'd like you to meet, he said gently that Pippa's bright eyes drifted to Isla. Everything about the moment felt sacred, like the world itself had paused to hold its breath. Instead of shyness, curiosity blossomed. Hi, Pippa said, tilting her head. Are you my daddy's friend? Isla knelt to her level, her smile warm but not forced. I hope so, if you'll let me be. I'm Pippa, she beamed. But sometimes daddy calls me Pickle. Do you like pickles? I love them, Isla laughed. Especially the crunchy ones. Pippa gasped dramatically. Me too. We already like the same thing. Kieran felt something knot in his chest. Not fear or doubt, but an unbelievable and unexpected relief. Can I show you my unicorn drawings? Pippa asked, grabbing Isla's hand without asking permission, and Isla didn't hesitate. Of course, she replied, rising as the child tugged her toward the living room. From that moment on, the world changed. There was no awkward silence. No tense pelaitnis. No careful stepping around invisible boundaries. There was only a child's fearless heart, wide open and ready to accept love. Pippa sat Isla down on the floor surrounded by scattered crayons, papers covered in flying horses and rainbow castles. This one's you, she said, pointing to a plump, stick-figure lady with a giant smile and a purple dress. You are purple now. That's your color. Isla's breath caught. You made me beautiful, she whispered. You are beautiful, Pippa said matter-of-factly. Daddy says the outside is just wrapping paper. The inside is the real gift. Kieran, standing in the doorway, turned away so they wouldn't see the tears silently tracing down his cheeks. From that evening forward, Isla began to slip into their world, not as a replacement, not as an outsider, but as a gentle, loving presence that filled empty spaces without trying to erase the past. She attended Pippa's ballet recitals, sitting in the front row with flowers clutched in her hands, cheering louder than anyone else when tiny arms twirled across the stage. "Did I do good, Miss Sisa?" Pippa asked after her first recital, bouncing nervously. "We didn't do good," Isla said, pulling her into a hug. "You were magical." On weekends, they'd bake together. The kitchen filled with flour-covered countertops, chocolate-smeared fingers, and laughter that echoed through rooms once filled with silence. "Don't forget the sprinkles," Pippa insisted every time, and Isla never did. She learned how to braid Pippa's wild curls and pack lunches shaped like animals, just like Kieran used to. They built snowmen in the winter, scarves crooked and carrot noses barely holding on. In spring, they planted tiny flowers in the backyard, each one labeled with a hand-painted rock. "This one's hope," Pippa declared, pushing dirt around a tiny seedling. "And this one is love. What about that one?" Isla asked, pointing to the smallest sprout of all. "That's you," she said simply. Those words, spoken by the purest voice Isla had ever known, rooted something eternal inside her heart. One night, as Pippa rested her head on Isla's chest while they watched a cartoon, she looked up with sleepy eyes. "Miss Isa?" "Yes, sweetheart. Can you be my forever friend?" A lump formed in Isla's throat. "I will always be your friend." "Not just friend," Pippa corrected. "You feel like my bonus mommy." The words hung in the air, fragile and sacred, a bonus mommy. Not a replacement, not a copy, but a gift added to something already precious. Isla looked up at Kieran, who had frozen across the room, his hand pressed gently against his mouth. Their eyes met, full of emotion too powerful for tears. And in that silence, something unspoken but profound passed between them, a realization. This wasn't just a connection. This wasn't just healing. This was the slow, natural birth of a family that had once been broken into pieces. Night after night, the three of them sat curled on the couch, sharing stories, secrets, dreams. Pippa's tiny hands nestled between theirs as if she were weaving them together stitch by silent stitch point, two broken hearts, one brave little girl, and a love that no prank, no judgment, no cruel laughter could ever undo. In the warm safety of that home, beneath the hush of bedtime prayers and shared smiles, three souls began to share something new. Not just friendship, not just healing, belonging, and with every whispered goodnight, bonus mommy, a real family was being born. The Velvet Finch Café hadn't changed. The same pale green walls, the same chipped little tables, the same quiet hum of voices layered over the soft clinking of cups and saucers. But everything else had. Months had passed since that first night, the night meant to shatter dignity and harvest laughter from pain. Seasons had shifted. The city had moved on. The people who had once whispered and filmed had long forgotten their own cruelty. Yet Kieran remembered every detail like a sacred echo. The corner where they'd Saturday the silence after his words. The way Isla had looked at him, as if he'd reached a place in her no one had ever dared to touch. This time, there were no hidden phones, and no smirking faces, and oh cruel intentions. Just three seats at a round table by the window, point one for him, point one for her, and one carefully placed beside Isla, where Pippa now sat, legs swinging, humming to herself as she colored on a napkin with a purple crayon. "Why did we come back here, Daddy?" she asked, looking up with curious eyes. Kieran smiled softly. "Because this is where something special started." Isla glanced around, her gaze gentle, reflective. "It feels different when you're not afraid," she said quietly. "It was never this place that hurt you," he replied. "It was the people in it." He didn't take her hand right away. He wanted to give her space, the kind he once needed himself. But somehow, their fingers found each other anyway, resting lightly on the edge of the table. The waitress approached with a warm smile. "Your usual?" She asked. Yes, Kieran responded. Then he looked at Isla. And whatever she wants. Isla Chakiv. You still don't know my order? I want to learn it, he said simply. For the rest of my life. The words slipped out so naturally that they startled even him. The waitress left, unaware that a moment larger than time itself had just taken root. Kieran's gaze moved from Isla to the window, and then to Pippa, who was now whispering to her drawing of a unicorn, as if it were sharing secrets back with her. He thought of the mornings Isla spent braiding her hair, the nights she read stories with silly voices, the way Pippa had begun calling her mom when she thought no one was listening, then would blush and correct herself to bonus mommy. As if love itself needed permission, he saw the flower garden out back, each tiny bloom growing stronger because Isla had taught Pippa how to nurture living things instead of fearing loss. He remembered Isla sitting at the edge of Pippa's bed one evening, brushing soft curls away from her forehead and whispering, "You are safe. You are loved. You are not alone." And how, without meaning to. Those words had healed all three of them. He looked back at Isla and realized the truth was suddenly so clear it almost frightened him. This had never been an accident. Not her arrival. Not his hesitation. Not even the cruelty that had brought them together. He had all been fate, wrapped in thorns, but softened by kindness. Kieran, Isla asked, noticing the storm of emotion behind his eyes. You changed our lives, he said quietly. She shook her head. You gave us a chance. You gave us a home. We made one together. Her voice trembled now, too. He pushed his chair back and slowly stood up. The hum in the cafe softened as a few heads turned. Isla's brow creased in confusion. Kieran, what are you? I don't have a ring, he said. I don't have fireworks or violins or a plan that took me a year to write out. People were beginning to notice. The room held its breath. But I have a life, he continued. A real one. With a little girl who deserves a world full of gentleness. And a woman who taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about presence. Pippa froze, her crayon dropping to the table. And I realized, he said, his voice thick with truth, that the only future that makes sense to me is one where you are always there when I wake up. He stepped closer to Isla, not kneeling, not performing, just standing in front of her, heart open and unguarded. So I'm not going to ask you in a way that belongs in a movie. He reached out and took her hands into his. I'm going to ask you in a way that belongs to us. His voice softened. Will you marry me? Silence. Pure. Sacred. Heavy with meaning. Isla's lips parted. Tears slid down her cheeks. Not in brokenness this time, but in surrender to joy she'd once been convinced she'd never be allowed to feel. You're not asking for perfection, she whispered. I'm asking for your heart, he replied. Exactly as it is. Her words came out as a trembling breath. Yes. The cafe erupted, not with cruel laughter this time, but with warm applause, soft cheers, hands pressed to mouths, strangers crying for a love that wasn't even theirs to hold. But the only voice that mattered was the smallest one standing on her chair. Does that mean she's my real mommy now? Pippa asked, eyes wide. Kieran and Isla both dropped to her level, laughing through tears. Different, Isla said, brushing a curl from her face. I'm your bonus mommy. Because you don't replace love, you add to it. Pippa wrapped her arms around both of them. Then I'm the luckiest girl in the whole world. Later, as the sun faded into twilight, just like it had that very first evening, they stepped outside the cafe hand in hand. The city moved around them. Cars, lights, strangers passing by. But they stood perfectly still on the pavement, three hearts tied together by something far bigger than chance. I'm sorry, Islam murmured. Forever believing this began as a joke. It did, Kieran said gently, but the best stories always do. She laughed through her tears. Then let's keep writing it. And with Pippa skipping ahead of them, calling back, come on, Mommy and Daddy, our future is waiting. They followed, not as people who had been set up, embarrassed, or broken, but as a family chosen by love. Because sometimes the world starts a story with cruelty. Only so kindness can finish it with commitment. The river moved slowly that afternoon, its surface catching the golden light of the late sun. as if even the water had paused to witness something holy. There were no grand arches, no chandeliers, no towering guest lists. Just a small wooden platform near the bank, wrapped in soft white fabric and wildflowers that danced gently in the breeze. It was simple, intimate, perfect, and it was theirs. Kieran stood at the front, his hands clasped together as he watched the path beside the trees. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with gratitude so deep it almost hurt. Then the music began and a tiny figure appeared first, stepping carefully onto the petals scattered along the ground. Pippa, in a delicate cream-colored dress, carried a small basket hugged to her chest. She moved slowly, purposefully, her eyes shining with importance. She was no longer the little girl who feared her father might be alone forever. She was the bridge between two hearts that had found their way home. Halfway down the path, she stopped and looked back with a grin so wide it held the sun inside it. "Daddy," she called softly, "I'm doing it right." He swallowed against the knot in his throat. "You're doing it perfectly, sweetheart." And then Isla appeared that a whisper moved through the gathered guests. Not because she was unexpected, but because she was breathtaking. Not in the way magazines define beauty, but in the way truth does. In the way love carves light into ordinary human beings. She walked slowly, eyes glistening, her gaze locked on Kieran as if there was no one else in the world. No laughter from the past, no judging eyes, no cruel whispers, only choice. When she reached him, Pippa stepped between them, her small hands joining theirs together. "We're a triangle now," she announced proudly. "That's the strongest shape." Soft laughter and gentle tears rippled through the crowd. The officiant spoke, but the words became a blur behind the truth beating in their chests. Then it was Isla's turn. She turned to Pippa first, dropping to one knee so their eyes met. "I promise," she said, voice trembling but sure, "to never make you feel invisible." Tears had already soaked the little girl's cheeks. "I promise to show up for you, every school day, every hard day, every happy day, even the boring ones." She smiled. "And I promise to love you deeply in all the ways that make you who you are." Pippa threw her arms around her. "I already love you more than unicorns," she whispered loudly. Laughter filled the air through tears. Then Isla rose and faced Kieran. "I promise to see you exactly as you are," she said. "Not just the strong father, not just the protector, but the wounded boy, the tired man, and the beautiful soul who never stopped believing in love." She placed his hand over her heart. "I promise to protect our family, and I choose you. Today, tomorrow, and every sunrise after." Kieran could hardly breathe. When he spoke, it came from the deepest place within him. "I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you and not behind you." His eyes shimmered. "I promise to see you in every form you show up as, and to honor it all." He tightened his grip on her hands. "And I promise to choose love every day, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, especially when it matters most." The wind lifted softly around them. The river whispered. The world watched in reverent stillness. And when the words, "You may kiss the bride," were finally spoken, it wasn't applause that came first. It was a collective breath released. A breath the world had been holding since the day cruelty first tried to break them. What had started as a joke, a setup, a plan to humiliate, had become something cruelty could never understand at a family built by choice, strength born from kindness, love carved out of pain. As Pippa ran ahead toward the riverbank, laughing and calling for them to follow, Kieran wrapped his arm around Isla and pressed his forehead to hers. "They tried to destroy us," he whispered. She smiled through happy tears. "And instead," she replied, "they introduced me to my life." Hand in hand, they followed their little girl into the fading sunlight, not as victims of a cruel world, but as living proof that love, when chosen, can overcome everything. The best love stories don't begin with perfection. They begin with pain and the bravery to move through it. That a single father who refused to become bitter, a woman who refused to believe she was unworthy, a little girl who had room in her heart for more love and one powerful truth. Kindness is stronger than cruelty. And the most powerful love is the one you choose to build every single day. Because sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones no one ever expected.